So let's now talk about diet and its impact on physical energy. We're lucky today, we've got an expert in the house, Gemma Cosgriff, who's a dietitian, and she's going to share with all of us today some tips on how to improve your physical energy through diet. Gem, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get stuck into it right away. What are 2 or 3 tips that you'd want to share with the audience in terms of what they should be considering for their diet to give them the most energy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to kind of use the analogy of a car. So we put good fuel into our vehicles to allow us to get from A to B and do what we want to do in our lives. Our body is our vehicle. We need to feed it good fuel. So really trying to avoid processed foods and getting as rich, nutritious foods that are as wholesome as possible. What's the sort of food that you could produce in your backyard if you had the time and the will to do it? Second of all, really focus on what you're putting in rather than cutting out. So every opportunity to eat, if it's a meal or a snack, how can we make sure we get the most out of that food that we're putting into our mouth? And third of all, I'd probably say it's about individual needs and working out exactly what works for you. So there's quite a number of different elements that make it that each one of us have individual needs. There's an overarching set of guidelines that we should be looking at and following, and that's helpful. But really, we've got to work out what timing, what type of food, how we cook it, our taste preferences, our cultural preferences, all of that coming into play. Trial and error to work out exactly what's going to work for you to get the most out of your day.
Okay. So, Jem, another question I wanted to ask you is, a lot of the people that we're talking to, they've got a lot on in life. Similar to yourself, you're a mum, you're a wife, you've got a corporate job, a high-pressure job, and often when the stress starts to mount, often what happens is bad habits start to kick in and the good habits kick out. So when those bad habits start kicking in and the good habits go out, what's the impact on our energy levels?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, there's comfort food, we might be skipping meals, we might be resorting to coffee, caffeine, alcohol. These sorts of things will impact on the fuel that's getting to our brains and the rest of our body. But when we're talking about a corporate job, most of the time it's about our concentration, our ability to keep thinking, keep working and keep going. So if we talk about not getting regular meals in, for instance, and resorting to probably mostly our processed foods, those comfort foods, they might be your Doritos, it might be chips, chocolate, sugary foods. Those sorts of things will cause a spike in our blood glucose levels. And while that might feel like we're doing a good job in getting something quick and easy on the go to fuel us and keep going, and it will make us feel like we can keep going, it actually spikes our blood glucose level and then it drastically drops after that. And then we are depleted again. And then we're going to want to reach for the same sort of food again to top us back up. So we want to try to avoid things like that. Even if you need to grab something on the go and it's a quick fix, if we can choose something that's going to sustain us for longer, it's better quality in terms of nutrients, then that's going to try to avoid hitting that peak and then that real trough that makes us feel not great, and then we'll reach for the next thing that's not that great for us. Things like caffeine and alcohol, we feel like it's stimulating us in the moment when we're consuming them, which again it is doing, and it's making us more alert, which is also most of the time what we're trying to achieve. But the impact that can have longer term over the day and then longer term more generally in life is that it can impact on our sleep. That means that we're getting less and worse quality sleep. That has an impact on things like leptin, the hormone that controls our appetite, which can then mean that we're eating too much the following day, every day after that, and then that can actually mean that we're not having good fuel, and then that's impacting further on our sleep. So we get into this vicious cycle and we're just not feeling great. We're constantly reaching for things that are going to keep us feeling alert and able to perform at the optimal standard that we want to be performing at, and it's really hard to get out of. So it's really important to try to focus on those decisions that we can make. Like I said earlier, with that opportunity to put something in our mouth, really make the most of that. What if that was the one mouthful of nutrients that we could get for quite a long period of time? How do we really make that a mouthful of gold rather than just a quick fix?
A mouthful of gold.
That's probably not.
I like that. I like that. The other thing I was going to ask you about is, and we talked about this before, kind of being busy throughout the day. And there's talk, breakfast is the most important meal, and then now there's talk about lunch being the most important meal. What's the best way to kick off the day?
Well, breakfast comes from, it's called breakfast because it's breaking the fast. So we've had an overnight stint of not consuming any energy. Our body is at a state of rest. The metabolism level is very low. Our heart rate's low. We're not doing it much, right? It's a time for rejuvenation, and it's a really important time for rejuvenation. But it's really important to kickstart the body into understanding that we're moving and we're up and about and it's on. So it is important to have something. Otherwise, the body will maintain its lower level, that lower metabolic rate, and we want to try to break that. Doesn't mean we need a massive cooked breakfast every day. Some people, breakfast is really hard to get in. But people just don't have appetite for it, or what sort of foods do we want to enjoy? I'm not saying that you need a massive breakfast. If it's just a piece of fruit, if it's a piece of whole grain toast, if it's something small like that, it will help to kickstart the body for the day. It's not necessarily that there's one meal more important than another. What I would say is that you want to probably put focus and preference on preparing for one meal or even 2 meals in a day where you will get the best nutritious food in as possible. So for me, for instance, I would say in trying to achieve my vegetable intake, which is often the hardest thing to get the quantity in that we need to get in, lunch and dinner is easier to get vegetables in for me.
Yep.
So that's the time I'm going to focus on trying to do that, and I personally have a lighter breakfast. So if someone actually has quite an appetite for breakfast, can you get a vegetable-rich breakfast? Get your mushrooms, your avocado, your egg, your tomatoes, corn, all sorts of meals can come out of breakfast where you're getting all of those nutrient-rich foods in. If that's to your liking, then aim for that and really focus on that. Also, something I think that a lot of us in the corporate world forget and don't focus on is hydration. It can be a bit of a pain. You're drinking a lot, you're refilling a water bottle or a water jug, you're going to the bathroom more. It can be inconvenient. However, dehydration and not being well hydrated can actually impact on our performance levels as well. And we see it in sport more, but we don't necessarily think about it in our day-to-day, particularly when we're being sedentary and sitting down all day at work. So I think that's really important to get plenty of water in. Sometimes that can actually curb what we think is appetite for food, and it's actually that we're thirsty.
Okay, great. Another great tip. Gem, I want to thank you for all the advice that you've given us. I've taken away a couple of learnings for me, which I'm excited about, and definitely our audience will take away some learnings as well, which ultimately, hopefully they can make, even if they started with 1 or 2 small changes, that will ultimately impact their energy. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you.